The Alpha King's pup was born deaf, until the Wolfless Omega pulled out something that shocked him. The kingdom of Lunara slept under a silver sky, the moon hanging low like a sentinel over the dark forests, and the palace of the Alpha King. Within the walls of the grand stone palace, whispers of fear and unease drifted like smoke. For tonight, a rare shadow had fallen upon the royal line. The Alpha King's newborn pup was born deaf. King Kale, a man feared for his strength and commanded respect for his wisdom, held the tiny creature in his hands. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, softened as they studied the fragile life before him. The pup, wrapped in silken cloth embroidered with the royal crest, twitched its small ears at nothing, unresponsive to the soft lullabies of the nurses. "Your Highness, it is as we feared," the court healer whispered, bowing low. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying her unease. "The child cannot hear. Some say it is an ill omen, a curse upon the bloodline." Kale's jaw tightened. He was the Alpha King of Lunara, the protector of the wolf lineage, and his blood bound the kingdom's strength. A weak pup, a deaf pup, was an anomaly that could threaten the very legacy of his pack. He placed the pup back into the cradle and looked out the window. The forest beyond the palace shimmered under moonlight, the trees whispering in the wind as if speaking in a language he could no longer fully understand. Kale had always been attuned to the world, the subtle vibrations of life, the scent of the earth, the quiet pull of the wolves that followed him. And yet, for the first time, he felt a pang of helplessness. A sudden knock at the door drew his attention. A messenger entered, bowing deep, carrying a small, worn satchel. "Your Highness," the young man said, "there is someone at the gates. She claims to be a Wolfless Omega, seeking permission to see the royal pup." Kale frowned. Wolfless Omegas were rare, wanderers who bore no wolf blood, no power of the pack. They were often outcasts, living on the edges of kingdoms, misunderstood and mistrusted. Yet somehow, she had found her way here, and curiosity pricked at him. "Bring her in," Kale commanded, his voice steady but cautious. "I will see what she wants." Moments later, the door opened to reveal Elara, a young woman whose presence seemed to bend the light around her. Her eyes were like polished amber, calm yet piercing, holding a wisdom that seemed far older than her years. She moved with a quiet grace, carrying neither weapon nor title, but an air that demanded attention.
"I am Elara," she said softly, bowing once before Kale.
"I have heard of the pup and I have something that may help." Kale's brow furrowed. "You claim you can help?" "You are wolfless. How could you possibly touch what belongs to my line?" Elara's gaze did not waver. "Sometimes it is not the blood that matters, Your Highness. Sometimes it is the heart. I can hear the silent. I can feel what others cannot." The court stirred uneasily. The idea that a wolfless Omega could touch the pup or awaken something hidden within him seemed impossible. Yet Kale, despite his pride and caution, felt a strange pull, a curiosity he could not deny. "Very well," Kale said finally, gesturing to the cradle. "But know this, if you harm the pup in any way, you will leave this palace alive only in name." Elara stepped closer, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. She knelt beside the cradle, studying the pup with careful attention. For long moments, nothing happened. The pup slept, oblivious to the human eyes upon him. Then, Elara whispered a single word, soft, melodic, almost like the wind through the trees. The pup twitched. Kale's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer. The small ears of the child, unresponsive for so long, flicked, not toward sound, but toward something else, something invisible, something Elara carried in her very presence. "Do you see that?" Kale murmured under his breath, though no one dared interrupt. Elara's fingers hovered over the pup's tiny chest, her touch gentle but certain. He hears in a way others cannot, she said quietly. Not with ears, but with his soul. He feels you, he feels me, he feels the world beyond sound. Kyle felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest. Pride, fear, awe, all twisted together. He had never believed in such things, yet here was proof that his pup, silent and still, was alive in a way he had not understood. Why can you do this? Kale asked, his voice softer than he intended. Elara looked up at him, eyes steady. Because some bonds are not born of blood, Your Highness. They are born of connection. He trusts me, and in that trust, his world begins to awaken. The court whispered among themselves, some in awe, others in fear, a wolfless omega touching the alpha's air. It was dangerous, even scandalous. Yet Kale could not deny what he saw. The pup's tiny hands reached instinctively toward Elara, a gesture of recognition that spoke louder than any sound. Kale's mind raced. What did this mean for the pup? For the kingdom, and for him? He felt something stir deep within, a vulnerability he had not allowed himself to feel in years. The thought both frightened and intrigued him. Elara's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. He is not broken, she said. He is waiting for someone to show him how to hear the world in his own way. Kale exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders in small increments. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to imagine possibility, not just fear. And yet, there was an unease that lingered at the edges of his thoughts, something about Elara's presence, about the way the pup responded, suggested that this awakening was only the beginning. Hours passed, and Kale remained at the side of the cradle, watching. The pup, guided by Elara's touch, began subtle movements, stirring limbs, blinking eyes that seemed to focus beyond the nursery, tiny breaths that synchronized with her own. It was a silent miracle, yet Kale could feel the weight of it in his chest. This pup, fragile and small, carried not just the blood of the alpha line, but a potential that could reshape everything he had known. At last, Elara stood, her hands leaving the pup's form. The child stirred once more, reaching out instinctively, then settled into a calm, as if reassured by an invisible presence. Kyle stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on the pup. You understand? He asked quietly, not expecting an answer. Elara's lips curved slightly.
He understands more than anyone can imagine, and he will need you to trust him as he learns to trust the world in return.
Kale's eyes narrowed, a storm of emotion behind them. Trust was not something he gave lightly. Yet, watching the pup, he realized that some bonds could not be forced. They had to be earned, nurtured, and sometimes awakened by a hand as gentle as Elara's. The night deepened around the palace, the moon casting silver shadows across the floor. Kale turned toward the window, seeing the forests that held the secrets of the pack, and somewhere in the distance the wind seemed to carry a whisper, soft, resonant, as if the kingdom itself was listening.
Stay, Kale said finally, his voice low but firm.
I will not promise safety, but you will remain with him. For now, if what you claim is true, we have much to learn.
Elara inclined her head, accepting the word without hesitation. Her gaze softened as she looked at the pup, who now seemed to stir with a quiet awareness, his tiny eyes reflecting the moonlight. For a long moment, the three of them, Alpha, Pup, and Wolfless Omega, stood together in the quiet of the night, bound not by blood but by something deeper. A spark of possibility had been lit, fragile and luminous, in a world that often prized strength over understanding. Then, a distant howl echoed through the forest, strange and unfamiliar, carrying with it a vibration that made Kale's heart skip a beat. The pup stirred violently, eyes wide, and Elara froze, sensing the same thing. Kael's instincts flared. Wolves were near, but these were not ordinary wolves. Their presence was shadowed, hungry, and something about them felt wrong. The air thickened with tension, the calm of the night shattered by the promise of danger. Elara stepped protectively in front of the pup. "They know," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "They know he has begun to awaken." Kael's hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword, yet he did not move to strike. His mind raced. The pup was his heir, fragile yet extraordinary, and the arrival of these wolves, whoever they were, was no accident. The child stirred once more, reaching toward Elara, and in that small gesture, Kael saw something he had not expected: hope, strength, a spark of life that refused to be broken. The Alpha King's heart clenched and expanded all at once. He was a protector, a warrior, and a king. But here, in the quiet of the nursery, he realized that the true battle had only just begun. Alara's amber eyes met his one last time before she knelt again beside the pup.
"We will face it," she said quietly.
Together. Kael swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his pride and the fragility of hope collide. And as the howl rose again in the night, closer this time, he understood that nothing would ever be the same. Not the pup, not Elara, not even himself. The moon cast its silver light across the room, illuminating the three figures bound by fate, mystery, and an unspoken promise. And in that light, the silent pup stirred once more, as if listening to something only he and Elara could hear. The moon hung low over Lunara, its silver glow brushing the towers of the palace with a light that felt colder than usual. Inside, the nursery was still, yet charged with a quiet energy, as if the night itself had paused to watch the unfolding of something extraordinary. King Kael sat beside the cradle, his broad shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the small figure that had changed the rhythm of his heart. The pup, still fragile and unsteady, blinked slowly at the flickering candlelight, tiny limbs twitching in response to some invisible current. Elara, kneeling beside the child, traced soft circles over its chest. Her amber eyes glimmered with something Kael could not name, a power older than the palace, older than the forests that stretched beyond its walls. She whispered words he could not hear, yet the pup's tiny hands reached instinctively toward her. Kael's chest tightened. He had faced armies, tamed wild beasts, and conquered rivals, yet here he felt powerless. He could protect his kingdom, his pack, even himself, but he could not control what stirred between the pup and the Wolfless Omega. "She is different," Kael murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "I've never seen anything like this." Elara glanced up at him, eyes steady but gentle. "Not everyone can see with their eyes, Your Highness. Some must feel with their soul." Kael's fingers tightened around the edge of the cradle. Soul. He had always understood strength, loyalty, duty. But what he felt now was neither strength nor loyalty, nor even duty. It was curiosity, and something more fragile. A longing he had buried beneath armor and command. The door to the nursery creaked open. One of the royal advisors, a lean man with sharp eyes, stepped in cautiously. "Your Highness," he said, voice low. Rumors spread quickly. They speak of a wolfless Omega touching the Alpha's heir. Some fear manipulation. Others speak of a curse undone. The court murmurs, and not all are patient. Kael's jaw tightened. He had anticipated whispers, perhaps even anger, but the tension in the air felt thicker than he expected. "And what do you suggest?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. "That we watch carefully, sire," the advisor said. "Her influence may be greater than we know." "Some say she can awaken power beyond what should exist in a pup." Kael did not respond immediately. His gaze returned to the child. Power, potential, but also vulnerability. He had always known that to be alpha was to shoulder the impossible, and now he understood that some dangers could not be fought with claws and teeth alone. Elara's hand paused over the pup's chest, and for a moment, silence reigned. Then the pup twitched violently, a small, sudden movement that drew both their attention.
"He reacts to you,"
Kale said quietly, almost in disbelief.
"Not me."
Not anyone else.
Ooh.
Elara's lips curved faintly.
He can sense me because I am unbound.
He responds to what I carry, not to sound or command. He is learning to feel the world in his own way. Kale studied her carefully. A wolfless omega, wandering and exiled by society, yet she carried a power that could awaken what had lain dormant for generations. And in that awakening, he felt something stir within himself. A recognition, a pull that made his pulse quicken. Hours passed in quiet observation. Gale watched as the pup slowly mirrored small movements Elara made. Tiny stretches of arms, subtle shifts of weight, a blink of recognition when her fingers hovered near. It was as though the child was learning a language beyond sound, one spoken with essence and trust. Yet as awe filled Kale's chest, unease coiled beneath it. A gift this rare would draw attention, some benevolent, some malevolent, and already he could sense eyes in the shadows, whispers brushing the edges of the court, waiting for an opportunity. Later that evening, Kale summoned Elara to the private hall, a chamber lined with dark oak and silver filigree. Candles flickered along the walls, casting long shadows that danced like specters.
You've changed him,
Kale said, voice low. The nurses and healers report subtle movements, instinctive reactions. He's beginning to awaken.
Elara nodded, her expression serious. I cannot take the credit.
He carries it within himself. I only show him the path. Kale's gaze lingered on her. There was something dangerous in her calmness, something that made his instincts both wary and unsettled. And you... What do you feel when you touch him? Elara's amber eyes met his. I feel his heart, his spirit, his potential. And I feel yours too, Your Highness. I know you resist it, but you are tied to this child in ways you have not allowed yourself to admit. Gale inhaled sharply. The weight of her words pressed against his chest. He had spent his life commanding, controlling, and defending. But here, he could do none of those things. The pull between them was not just necessity. It was undeniable, dangerous, and yet exhilarating. Before he could respond, a sudden knock at the chamber door startled them both. A messenger entered, panting, eyes wide. Oh, Your Highness! Wolves. Strange wolves approaching the palace. They carry the scent of shadow and blood. They know he has begun to awaken! Khael's hand instinctively went to his sword hilt, muscles coiling for battle. But his gaze fell on Elara, who had already risen, standing protectively in front of the pup. Her presence was calm, yet electric, as if the very air responded to her. They know, she said softly, eyes narrowing. And they will come for him if we do not act. Kale's jaw clenched. These were no ordinary wolves. He could feel the dark energy in their approach, a hunger that went beyond instinct. Something ancient had noticed the awakening of the pup, and it moved swiftly, quietly, and without mercy. He turned to Elara. Tell me what to do. You are... connected.
If we are to protect him, I must trust you completely. Elara's gaze softened.
Trust is not given lightly, Your Highness. But you must...
Or the danger will consume everything. Together, they moved toward the nursery, Kale's sword was drawn, but he found himself hesitating at the doorway, watching Ilara's connection to the pup. Her hands hovered, faint vibrations rippling from her fingertips to the child, and he could see the subtle echo of energy flow between them. The pup stirred violently, small arms flailing as though he could sense the encroaching threat. Kale's heart clenched. Every instinct screamed to protect, to strike, to control. But the true protection lay not in steel, but in the bond forming here, delicate and extraordinary. The palace walls shivered, as though aware of the approaching danger. Kale could hear faint whispers on the wind, not words, but sensations, ripples of shadow that prickled his skin. The wolves were near. Ilara knelt beside the pup, her voice soft and steady. "Listen, not with your ears, but with your spirit. Feel me, feel the bond. Nothing can touch you if you trust it." The pup's small hands moved, brushing against hers instinctively. A quiet pulse radiated outward. Not sound, not command, but something that resonated in the air. Kale's chest ached as he watched, awestruck. The child, silent and fragile, had begun to awaken in a way even he could not fully understand. The first howl tore through the forest beyond the palace walls, sharp and unnatural. Kale's sword arm twitched, muscles ready to strike, but Ilara's hand gripped his arm, halting him. "Do not interfere," she whispered. "This is his moment. He must rise to it." The howl came again, closer, reverberating through the stone walls. The pup's eyes glimmered faintly, glowing with a strange light that made Kale's pulse quicken. The air around them seemed to hum, charged with energy that was both frightening and exhilarating. Kale realized then that Ilara had been right. He could not protect the pup through strength alone. He could only be present and allow the child to awaken with guidance, with trust, and with the mysterious power of the Wolfless Omega.
Minutes? Or was it hours? Passed intense silence.
Then the pup lifted his tiny head, gazing at Ilara. For the first time, he moved in response to something beyond instinct, beyond reflex. He reached out, his small fingers brushing against her palm, and in that gesture Kale saw not just recognition, but a spark of something eternal. Courage, connection, and life. He had faced countless threats, yet nothing had shaken him like this. Nothing had held the weight of hope and fear intertwined. And yet, he understood now that the awakening of the pup was not just about survival. It was about trust, about the bond between them all, about the power that rose when hearts dared to connect across boundaries. Outside, the shadows deepened. The wolves were coming. But inside, a bond had formed that no steel, no claw, no darkness could easily break. Kale and Ilara shared a glance, one of understanding, tension, and a silent promise. Whatever waited in the night, they would face it together. And the pup, once silent and still, now stirred with life, ready to hear the world in ways no one else could. The palace of Lunara had never felt so heavy. Shadows clung to the stone walls like living things, twisting in shapes that made the courtiers whisper in fear. King Kale moved through the halls with quiet urgency, every step echoing his inner unrest. The pup's awakening, guided by Ilara, had stirred forces older than the throne itself, and he could sense the weight of them pressing down upon the kingdom. Ilara walked beside him, her amber eyes steady, though her hands clutched the pup's blanket with faint tension. Though she had been confident in the nursery, the deeper the danger spread into the palace, the more she realized the fragility of their situation. The pup's power had awoken, yes, but it had also called the attention of those who would use it for destruction. Kale reached the private hall, a room lined with ancient texts and scrolls detailing the history of Lunara's alpha lineage. He pulled open a heavy oak chest, revealing leather-bound tomes and parchment. His fingers traced the worn scripts as he muttered, "I have always protected this line, but I never understood
Elara's voice was soft, yet strong.
The pup's deafness, it was never a flaw.
It was a seal. Kael turned sharply, eyes narrowing. A seal?
Yes, Elara said. An old curse was placed on your bloodline centuries ago.
Only a child born without the full blessing of the wolves could carry it, and only a wolfless Omega could awaken what is hidden within him.
Kael felt the weight of her words settle over him like a storm cloud. He had faced countless enemies, yet nothing had prepared him for this revelation. Thanks to revelation, his own lineage, his own child, carried a curse older than memory, and the responsibility to guide him rested not on strength alone, but on trust, understanding, and something far deeper, something he had never allowed himself to feel.
What kind of curse? Kael asked, his voice tight.
Tell me exactly what we are facing. Elara knelt beside the pup, whose small eyes now seemed to flicker with a strange inner light. The curse was meant to test the Alpha line, she explained.
To see if strength alone could protect the kingdom. But the child, he is different. He carries the potential to rise beyond ordinary limits, but only if guided by someone unbound, someone who can awaken what is sealed inside him. Strength alone had always been his answer. Command, loyalty, discipline. These had defined him. And yet here, in this dimly lit hall, he realized that they would not be enough. He could not control the awakening of the pup, nor could he shield him with swords and walls. The pup needed trust, connection, and guidance. Suddenly the pup stirred violently, small limbs flailing as though he sensed something approaching. Elara's hand hovered protectively over him, energy rippling faintly from her fingers. Kael felt it brush against his chest, a spark that both unsettled and intrigued him.
"They're near," Elara whispered, her eyes flicking toward the darkened windows. "The shadows are drawn to his awakening."
He had expected enemies among humans, perhaps rival factions within the court, but what Elara described was different. The forces approaching were ancient, primal, and unbound by ordinary rules. They sought not just to harm the child, but to claim the power rising within him. The door to the hall creaked open suddenly, and an advisor stepped in, eyes wide with fear.
Your Highness.
There are wolves, unnatural wolves, gathering at the palace gates. They carry the scent of shadow and decay. Some say they are drawn to the pup's energy. Kael drew a deep breath, muscles coiling. Prepare the guards. Arm the walls.
And send word to the elders. We face something beyond ordinary combat.
Elara's hand tightened around the pup's blanket. Fighting them directly will not help. They are drawn to his spirit, not his body. Only the bond between us, between him, you, and me,
can protect him. Kael's gaze softened as he looked at her, then at the pup.
The child's eyes glimmered faintly, reflecting the candlelight, and something more, a promise, perhaps, or a warning. Kael realized that the bond forming here was more than survival. It was the awakening of potential, a bridge between blood and soul, strength and trust. Hours passed, the tension coiling tighter with each moment. The unnatural wolves prowled the outskirts of the palace, their forms glimpsed as shifting shadows. The pup, guided by Elara, began to respond in subtle ways. A twitch of his hand, a movement of his small head, a blink that seemed to signal understanding. Kael watched, awestruck and troubled. He had always believed in command and order, in strength and control. Yet here, in this quiet chamber, he realized that some power could not be commanded. It could only be awakened, and it required vulnerability, something he had not allowed himself to feel in centuries. Suddenly, the pup emitted a tiny sound. Not a cry, not a bark, but a vibration that seemed to ripple through the air. It was faint, almost imperceptible, yet Cale felt it in his chest. Ilara smiled softly, placing her hand over the pup's panther.
He is learning, she whispered. He can feel beyond the silence. Ha!
He is awakening. Not hide in the Cale's chest, tightened with conflicting emotions, pride, awe, fear, longing, all intertwined. He had faced enemies, tamed wild beasts, and commanded loyalty from his pack, yet nothing had shaken him like this. The quiet power of a fragile child guided by a wolfless omega. Then, a howl tore through the forest outside, closer and more urgent than before. Cale's instincts flared. The unnatural wolves were not waiting. They were striking. Guards shouted in alarm, their voices barely carrying over the approaching storm of shadows. Ilara rose, positioning herself between the pup and the door.
"Do not interfere," she said, voice low but firm. "The child must rise to meet this."
He must awaken fully, or we cannot hope to protect him. Cale's hands clenched the hilt of his sword. His instincts screamed, to fight, to protect, to command. And yet, watching Ilara, watching the pup, he realized that true protection required something beyond steel and teeth. It required trust, courage, and surrender to the bond forming between them. The howl came again, closer, vibrating through the walls. The pup stirred violently, tiny fists reaching out, and for a fleeting moment Cale felt the pull of something ancient, something that linked the child, the Omega, and himself in a thread older than the palace or the kingdom. Ilara knelt beside the pup, her hands hovering in a protective arc. She whispered, "Trust. Trust the bond. Nothing can reach you if you do." The pup's small hands moved, brushing against her fingertips. A faint pulse radiated outward, not sound, not command, but energy, pure, vibrant, and alive. Cale's chest tightened as he realized the pup's awakening was more than potential. It was a force that could shift the balance of the kingdom, awaken powers long dormant, and even touch him in ways he had not imagined possible. Outside, the shadows coalesced, taking shapes that were neither fully wolf nor fully human. Their eyes glimmered with a strange light, reflecting hunger and anticipation. Cale could sense the danger, but he also felt a quiet thrill, a recognition that the bond forming here, fragile and luminous, was stronger than any shadow. Ilara's voice cut through his thoughts. "Cale, you must see it. This is his awakening, but also ours. The bond we form now will define what comes next. Trust him, trust us, trust me." Cale's gaze met hers, and in that silent exchange, centuries of pride, fear, and solitude seemed to melt away. He nodded slowly, acknowledging not just the danger, but the power of connection. The pup's eyes glimmered brighter, small hands reaching instinctively, and Cale felt something stir deep within. A vulnerability, yes, but also a strength that had nothing to do with dominance or command. The first shadow reached the walls of the palace, its form massive and shifting, a ripple of darkness and intent. Cale stepped forward instinctively, but Ilara's hand on his arm stopped him. "Let him rise," she said softly. "He must hear the world in his own way, and in doing so,
"Awaken the power that will protect us all!"
The pup's tiny body quivered. Then stillness fell. A quiet hum, almost imperceptible, filled the chamber, resonating from him and Ilara in tandem. Cale felt the pulse in his chest, a vibration that connected them all in a thread of energy older than the palace, older than the moonlit forest. Then, as the shadows pressed closer, the pup's small voice emerged, not loud, not clear, but a resonant echo that made the very air tremble. The glow in his eyes intensified, illuminating the nursery with a light that was both fragile and unstoppable. Cale's breath caught. This was no ordinary awakening. The child, guided by Ilara, had begun to call upon the hidden power of the Alpha line, And in that moment, Kale understood. The curse had never been a punishment. It was a test, a challenge, a call to awaken what had lain dormant in his bloodline. But the danger was far from over. The shadows waited, ancient and relentless, drawn to the child's rising power. Kale tightened his jaw, drawing a slow breath. The Alpha King, protector of Lunara, felt a flicker of fear and a surge of hope. The pup's awakening was not just a miracle, it was a beginning. The night over Lunara was alive. The moon shone like a silver blade, cutting through the dark clouds that roiled above the palace. Shadows moved beyond the walls, but within the nursery, a different kind of power stirred, a quiet, luminous energy that pulsed with life, strength, and hope. King Kale stood by the cradle, sword in hand, yet he felt no need to strike. The child, once fragile and silent, now glowed faintly in the candlelight, tiny eyes reflecting a depth of understanding far beyond his age. Beside him, Elara knelt, hands hovering protectively, her amber eyes steady and glowing with quiet energy. "They are coming," she whispered. Her gaze flicked toward the distant shadows that slithered like liquid darkness across the outer walls. And this time,
"I will not wait."
He had faced countless enemies, men, beasts, even the occasional supernatural threat. But the shadows outside were different. They were drawn to the pup's awakening, drawn to the energy Elara had helped release. If they breached the palace, the child's life, the kingdom, and even their own hearts could be at risk. Kale looked down at the pup. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said quietly. "Stronger than anyone expects." The pup's tiny hand moved, reaching instinctively toward him, a gesture of trust that sent a wave of warmth through Kale's chest. For the first time in decades, the Alpha King allowed himself to feel vulnerability, not as weakness, but as a bridge to something greater. Elara placed her hand gently over the pup's. "He is ready," she said softly. "And so are we." A sudden crash outside the nursery door shook the walls. The shadows had reached the palace, and with them came a surge of cold, dark energy. Kale gripped his sword, muscles coiled, but he did not step forward. Instead, he watched as Elara extended both hands over the pup, murmuring words that vibrated softly through the air, though no sound could be heard.
The pup responded instantly.
A faint glow surrounded his tiny body, rippling outward in waves of light and energy that brushed against the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. Kale felt the vibrations in his chest, deep and resonant, a reminder that this awakening was more than strength. It was life itself, it was connection, and it was hope. The shadows outside surged closer, dark forms twisting and writhing. Yet the pup, guided by Elara, lifted his tiny voice. Again, not a cry, not a bark, but a vibration that resonated through the stone, through the air, and into the hearts of all present. The glow intensified, bathing the nursery in a light that was at once fragile and unstoppable. Kale's heart pounded. He realized then that the pup was not just a child of the Alpha line. He was a bridge between the mundane and the mystical, a force that could awaken something deeper within the kingdom itself. And in that realization, Kale felt a shift within himself. His pride, his fear, his long-held armor of solitude, all began to crumble in the face of the bond forming before him. The shadows pressed against the nursery walls, black and hungry. Yet they could not enter. The bond between the child and Elara, strengthened by Kale's quiet presence, formed an invisible barrier, a shield of trust and connection. It pulsed outward, resonating with the energy of the awakened pup, and the shadows recoiled, writhing and shivering under its light. Kale moved closer, placing a hand over the pup's. "We are with you," he said, voice steady.
"Always." Elara's eyes softened as she looked at him. "And he feels that?"
"That is what gives him strength. Not fear, not command, but trust." The shadows surged again, A final, desperate attack. Kale raised his sword, but before he could act, the pup's glow flared brighter, a wave of pure luminous energy rippling outward. The shadows screamed silently, curling back into the forest beyond the palace walls, unable to withstand the combined force of bond, trust, and awakening. Kale exhaled, a tension he had carried for decades, melting away. The nursery, once a place of fear and uncertainty, now pulsed with life and light. The pup, tiny and trembling, lifted his head and looked at Kale and Alara, eyes wide and filled with a quiet intelligence.
"He did it," Kale said softly, awestruck. "He protected himself."
"He protected us." Alara smiled, her amber eyes glimmering with relief and pride.
"He has always had the power," she said. "He only needed guidance
and connection." Kyle looked down at the pup, then at Alara, and felt something stir deep within him, a feeling he had long denied: hope, trust, and the fragile beginnings of love. He realized that to protect the pup, to guide him into his destiny, he had to allow himself to feel, to open, to connect. Not just as a king, not just as an alpha, but as a man capable of heart. The first light of dawn crept through the tall windows, brushing the nursery in soft gold. The shadows of the night receded, leaving behind the calm after the storm. Yet Kael knew this was only the beginning. The awakening of the pup had set events in motion, prophecies, curses, and the unseen forces of the kingdom. But for the first time, he believed they could face whatever came next. Together, Alara stood and gathered the pup in her arms. "He is safe, for now," she said, voice calm but firm. "And he will continue to grow, to learn, to awaken fully. But the kingdom must understand that this power is not a threat."
"It is a gift." Kale nodded slowly.
"Then we will protect him. All of us. Not just with walls and warriors, but with trust and with heart." He knelt beside them, placing a hand gently on the pup's tiny head. The child reached up, grasping his finger with surprising strength. Kael felt a warmth ripple through him, a silent promise exchanged between alpha and heir. And in that simple gesture he understood. The bond they shared was eternal, forged not by blood alone but by connection, trust, and the courage to awaken. The palace began to stir with life, servants and guards cautiously emerging to witness the aftermath of the night's events. Whispers spread quickly, though no one dared question the miraculous display of light and power in the nursery. Kale walked through the halls, Alara at his side, feeling the strength of what they had achieved together. The pup, still in Alara's arms, seemed calm now, eyes fluttering closed for a moment, as if gathering energy from the presence of those who cared for him. Kale realized then that protection was no longer a matter of fear or force. It was a matter of trust, teaching, and letting the child awaken at his own pace. Alara glanced at him, and Kale felt the quiet acknowledgement between them, a silent agreement that the bond they shared, Alpha, Pup, and Wolfless Omega, was unbreakable. It was not born of circumstance alone, but of choice, courage, and heart. The days passed, and the palace grew accustomed to the new rhythm of life. The pup continued to awaken, guided by Alara, his small body and mind responding to her gentle teaching and Kael's quiet strength. The bond deepened, not just between the child and his protectors, but among all three of them, forming a triangle of trust, love, and emerging power. One evening, under the same silver moon that had witnessed his first awakening, the pup stirred, eyes glowing softly. He reached toward Kael and Alara simultaneously, a gesture of unity and recognition. Kael's chest tightened as he felt the profound truth of what they shared. The child was not only the heir of the Alpha line, but the bridge to something far greater, a future where strength, heart, and trust coexisted. Alara placed a hand over Kael's and then over the pup's, connecting them in a silent, luminous bond. The energy radiated outward, not as a weapon, not as command, but as light, hope, and life itself. Kael felt the pulse in his chest, the rhythm of the kingdom, the strength of the alpha line, and the warmth of connection he had long denied himself. The shadows beyond the palace had not returned, and Kale knew they might, someday. But he also knew that no force, no curse, no darkness, no enemy could break the bond they had forged. The pup had awakened, yes, but more importantly, Kale himself had begun to awaken, to trust, to connect, to feel. The first rays of dawn broke through the horizon, bathing Lunara in gold and silver. The palace, once heavy with fear and uncertainty, now pulsed with life and hope. Kale, Elara, and the pup stood together, 3 souls connected by fate, courage, and love, ready to face the future. The kingdom would remember this night not for the danger that approached, but for the awakening of power, trust, and heart. And in that light, Kale understood that the true strength of an alpha did not lie in command or fear, but in the courage to open one's heart and to protect those bound to him with unwavering trust. The pup stirred one final time, eyes wide, small hand reaching for both Kale and Elara, and in that gesture, luminous and eternal, Kale felt the promise of tomorrow, the promise of a kingdom reborn, a bond unbroken, and a family united by choice, courage, and the magic of trust.